Welcome back to Rainbow Nation Radio, where we explore South Africa through American eyes. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jessica. Imagine a world where the line between legitimate business and organized crime is so blurred, you can't tell where one ends and the other begins.
That's the story of Mark Lifman, Cape Town's infamous shot caller, whose life ended in a hail of bullets in a mall parking lot.
Wow, that's quite an opening. It sounds like something straight out of a crime thriller.
Oh, it absolutely is. But here's the kicker. This isn't fiction. This is the real-life story of a man who straddled the line between businessman and criminal mastermind for decades.
So, how did Lifman manage to build such a complex empire? I mean, it can't have been easy to maintain that balance for so long.
Well, that's the million-rand question, isn't it? Lifman started out as just another kid at Sea Point Boys High School. But after his military service, he quickly made a name for himself as someone with a sharp business instinct.
From high school to high-stakes business, that's quite a journey.
You're telling me. One Russian insider even described him as a guy who turns everything he touches into profit. But here's where it gets interesting. Lifman's empire wasn't just built on legitimate businesses. He had his fingers in everything from property development to horse racing, nightclubs to taxi services.
That's quite a diverse portfolio. But I'm guessing not all of those ventures were on the up and up?
Right. Well, that's where the lines start to blur. On the surface, Lifman was a successful businessman, even working with NGOs and donating to charity. But beneath that facade, there was a much darker reality brewing.
So, what kind of darker reality are we talking about here?
We're talking about deep connections to Cape Town's underworld. For instance, Lifman owned a strip club with a known underworld figure called Yuri the Russian. But it was his involvement in Cape Town's nightclub security scene that really put him in the spotlight.
Nightclub security? That doesn't sound too sinister on its own.
Oh, you'd be surprised. In Cape Town, nightclub security is big business, and it's often tied to organized crime. Lifman's security business associates frequently drew attention for their ties to criminal elements.
Well, that certainly paints a different picture. How did he manage to keep this balancing act going for so long?
It was a combination of business savvy, powerful connections, and frankly, fear. Lifman's network included notorious players like Radovan Krejcir, a name feared for his violent ambition. But even these alliances were fraught with danger.
It sounds like he was playing a very dangerous game.
You've got that right. And it all came to a head on May 21st, 2007. That's when one of the most infamous hits in Cape Town's underworld history happened. Yuri the Russian, who was a feared figure in the club and bouncer scene, was gunned down as he drove his family home from a birthday dinner.
Oh my God, that's horrific. Was Lifman connected to this somehow?
Well, here's where it gets murky. Lifman had been at the birthday dinner with Yuri that night. While he was never officially connected to the hit, it certainly raised eyebrows. And it wasn't the last time Lifman's name would be associated with violence.
So, if we're talking about such a dangerous world, how did the authorities respond to all of this?
Now we're getting to the really interesting part. In 2013, SARS, that's the South African Revenue Service, launched an investigation called Project Honey Badger. It was aimed at addressing tax evasion and corruption within the tobacco industry.
Tax evasion? That seems like a far cry from the violent underworld we've been discussing.
You'd think so, right? But here's the thing. Lifman and his associates found themselves under intense scrutiny. SARS even issued Lifman a tax bill for 388 million rand. That's about 20 million US dollars.
Whoa, that's a staggering amount. How did Lifman respond to that?
Well, he claimed it was impossible, saying his net worth was only 100 million rand at the time. But the investigation didn't stop there. It also looked into Lifman's connections with convicted drug dealer Glenn Agliotti and cigarette manufacturer Adriano Mazzotti.
So we've got tax evasion, potential drug connections, and a violent turf war all swirling around this one man. It's like a perfect storm of criminal activity.
Exactly, and it gets even more intense. In 2022, Lifman was in court, trying to prevent SARS from liquidating his property business. But while he was fighting these legal battles, an even darker plot was allegedly unfolding.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, the state's case paints a chilling picture. They allege that Lifman, in a bitter feud over lucrative property deals, conspired to have a man named Brian Weinstein killed.
Brian Weinstein? Who was he?
Weinstein was a kingpin in the underground pharmaceutical trade. He was importing raw materials from Turkey, Greece, and China to craft potent steroids in South Africa. His empire was estimated to be worth between 40 and 50 million rand.
So we're talking about a major player in the illegal drug trade. And Lifman allegedly wanted him dead?
That's what the state claims. They say that what began as a business rivalry turned into a deadly scheme. But this wasn't the only legal trouble Lifman was facing.
It sounds like his past was catching up with him from all directions. But what finally led to his downfall?
Well, that's the most shocking part of the story. On November 2nd, 2024, Lifman was in George, reportedly for a quiet round of golf. Around 11:30 a.m., he was seen walking alone in a mall parking lot, which was unusual for a man who almost always moved with bodyguards.
And that's when it happened?
Yep, a suspect, later identified as a former security professional, sped up in a white VW Polo. Lifman was shot multiple times and left lying in a pool of blood.
That's a brutal end for anyone, even someone as controversial as Lifman. Were the killers caught?
They were. The police and security teams pursued the gunman and captured him near Uniondale. But here's where it gets even more twisted. CCTV footage showed the alleged hitman stopping at a nearby farm to change the car's license plates.
So it was clearly a planned hit. But who was behind it?
Well, Jerome Boyson, Lifman's former partner, has pointed the finger at Alwyn Landman, the owner of PPA Security. Boyson claims that Landman orchestrated the hit, using former employees as hitmen.
But I'm guessing Landman denies this, right?
Absolutely. Landman has vehemently denied any PPA involvement in Lifman's murder. He insists that his company is entirely unconnected to Lifman.
This is an incredibly complex case. It seems like everyone involved has some kind of connection to the underworld, making it hard to know who to believe.
You've hit the nail on the head there. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. It's a tangled web of power, money, and violence that spans decades and involves some of the most notorious figures in Cape Town's underworld.
So, what do you think are the key takeaways from this story?
Well, I think there are a few important points to consider. First, it shows how thin the line can be between legitimate business and organized crime. Lifman managed to straddle that line for years, but eventually it caught up with him.
And it also highlights the cyclical nature of violence in these underworld power struggles. It seems like there's always someone waiting to take your place at the top.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of the old saying, live by the sword, die by the sword. Lifman's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of getting involved in this kind of lifestyle.
It certainly is. And I think it also raises questions about the effectiveness of law enforcement in dealing with these complex, long-running criminal enterprises.
That's a great point. Despite years of investigations and legal battles, it wasn't the law that finally caught up with Lifman. It was a bullet in a parking lot. It's a sobering thought that reminds us of the real human cost of organized crime and violence.
Well, that's certainly given us a lot to think about. It's a story that's going to stick with me for a while.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, it's worth considering the broader implications of Lifman's story. What does it say about the nature of power and corruption in our society? How do we address these deep-rooted issues? These are questions we'll be grappling with for a long time to come.
It's definitely food for thought. Thanks for diving into this complex and fascinating story with us today.
And thank you for joining us on Rainbow Nation Radio, where we explore South Africa through American eyes. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment to join the conversation. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.